If you ever bought a US stock or ETF using Canadian dollars, you've definitely paid this fee. What fee, you may ask? Well, obviously I'm talking about the foreign exchange fee. And this is a fee banks charge you to convert your money. In most cases, you pay 1.5% to buy and then 1.5% when you're ready to sell. And honestly, 1.5% doesn't sound like much, but it actually is a lot of money. When we're talking about investing, we're not talking about buying a gaming console for $500. We're talking about, let's say, buying $10,000 worth of Apple or an S&P 500 ticker like VO over the course of, let's say, the year or multiple years. So on $10,000, this little fee is actually $150 just to buy this stock or ETF. And then when you sell, you gotta pay more, whether it grows, especially if it grows, and obviously you pay it on the full value to convert it back. So that's not ideal. And today I want to talk about, obviously, Norbert's Gambit. I've heard about it a lot. I don't really buy the US stocks myself very often, but I was like, look, I can't keep talking about finance and not actually try it out myself. That's kind of silly. This is exactly what I'm going to talk about today. What kind of hoops you have to jump through to avoid this ridiculous foreign exchange fees and whether it actually makes any sense to do so. And of course, where is this limit of how much money we need to actually transfer using Norbert's Gambit to make it all sort of make sense. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And of course, as I mentioned, I always like doing things the simple way because I'll be honest with you, I've tried it the hard way in the past, and it was just a lot of work for very little payoff. Just so I don't have to deal with currency exchange, I would just buy a Canadian exchange listed version of US funds. So I've mentioned VO in the past, which is the US one. Usually in this case, I would buy VFV, which has a bit of a higher MER, but is absolutely worth it for me for peace of mind. But it's important to acknowledge as well that sometimes you want to buy a specific stock or a specific US listed equity. They have a lot of equities listed on the platform. And I mean, we don't have to go too far to say SpaceX, right? If you wanted to buy that, that's a US listed equity. And there's no Canadian version available at times. So then when you go ahead on the Wealthsimple app, you click buy because you want to ride the SpaceX rally. Whether it's Wealthsimple, Questrade, or RBC, doesn't really matter. That 1.5% fee will be baked into your exchange rate. And as I mentioned, you always pay twice. So you pay 1.5% when you buy, and then when you're ready to sell, and all of a sudden you've 2x'd your $10,000 magically, you actually pay $300 on your $20,000 instead of $150. So in total on this transaction, you paid close to $500 just in exchange fees, which is kind of ridiculous. 3% is a big chunk that's taken out of your returns. But as I mentioned, there's a solution, Norbert's Gambit. But what is it? When I first heard about it, it sounded incredibly complicated. A lot of people on Reddit and just ever in general made it sound like some secret, super complicated, super niche loophole that people had to do. But it's actually very simple. Instead of converting your cash, you sort of convert your ETF from Canadian to the US ticker. So let's say you buy a specific ETF in Canadian dollars, and then you ask your brokerage to switch it to the US dollar of this exact same ETF. And then you sell it. When you sell it, you get cash in US dollars, and you bypass the bank's exchange rate. And most people, at least as far as I see, use the Global X US dollar currency ETF for this. So on the Canadian side, it's DLR, and then on the US side, it's DLR.U. And so I was like, okay, let's try this out. I mean, it's not a big loss. It's for my personal learning, so might as well. And luckily, in the past, I don't know how recently they've actually changed it. I think in the past, IBKR was the only one who was able to do this, so interactive brokers platform. I think now even Wealthsimple allows it. So that's obviously easier for me. I didn't want to create a new account in IBKR and try things out, work out the new interface, whatever. So luckily, we live in the 21st century, in the 2020s. I don't know if that's so much luck. I mean, this decade has been very interesting, but that's not the point. The point is in the past, you had to call the brokerage, you had to wait on hold, you had to ask them to transfer the shares, and worst of all, you had to talk to a human on the phone, which I know some of you, including myself, some days you just don't want to talk to anybody. Just want to press a button. And we can do that. Interestingly, Wealthsimple actually does have a feature built in for this. You just take your Canadian cash and you buy shares of DLR. And then there is a little button to journal them. And you pick the US version of the ETF, DLR.U. And I think Questrade, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Questrade, you have to create a little support message or you have to send a little chat to them to do the same thing, which is still very, very simple. But of course, here's the annoying part. You do have to wait a little bit, which is okay if you're just buying kind of ETFs at certain intervals. If you're trying to rally for SpaceX, it's a little bit more tricky. But I'm sure if you were actually waiting for this IPO, you would have had money sitting in your account already. But yeah, it takes about a couple days for the switch to happen. And so once they show up, and in Wealthsimple, for example, you need to have a US account for that, I believe, right? So once they show up as DLR.U, you just sell them. Oh, all of a sudden you have all this US cash. So obviously make sure you have the US account open for this, because otherwise, I think they're just going to land in your Canadian account and you will actually have to pay the exchange fee. So that would be all waste. I may or may not have done that. I will not comment on this. But overall, it's a pretty smooth process. Of course, there's one little thing. Nothing is free, right? First of all, the flat fees. So Wealthsimple charges you a $10 fee, $9.95 Canadian to be precise, for a journal fee. And Questrade charges you the commission when you actually sell the ETF. And of course, you lose a couple cents because there's always the bid-ask spread when you're buying or selling an ETF just in the market, whether it's DLR when you're buying it or DLR.U when you're selling it. But they're pretty liquid, so I don't think that's actually that big of a deal. And for some people, of course, it's not an instantaneous procedure. You do have to have your money locked in or locked up, whatever you want to call it, for 2 or 3 days, depending on when you buy it. So if you're trying to buy US stock because the price just dropped and you need to get in right now, that's probably too slow. And I mean, in this case, you might as well just buy it directly. But again, I always preach about not trying to time the market, this kind of stuff. So the question is, lastly, when should you actually do this? Well, because as I mentioned, there is a flat fee as well as the bid-ask spread, which we'll ignore for this calculation because usually it will be quite minuscule for this. There is a flat fee of $10. So if you're buying $100 worth of stock, ETF, you will only be paying 1.5% of this, which is $1.50. So it's not worth paying $10 for this and waiting 2 to 3 days. However, if it's more than, and I think the math kind of breaks even at about $700 because that's when we hit 1.5% of 700 and we get $10.50. It probably still doesn't make sense for you because for 50 cents going through all this process, but it's kind of an interesting thing to just understand and do for yourself. So if you are looking to buy like $1,000 worth of whichever stock or ETF that's listed on the US stock exchange, I suggest just doing Norbert's Gambit once, just so you can tell all your friends about how great it is and how you're essentially a financial guru now. So once again, let's say $1,000 is kind of the break-even point. So if you're converting $5,000 or $10,000, obviously it makes sense to go the Norbert's Gambit way versus just buying the ETF for a US listed stock directly. And, that's an easy way to save yourself, $100 on 10,000, as I said. And then do the same thing when you're moving it back to Canadian dollars, you save yourself a little more money. So I think just knowing about Norbert's Gambit is actually pretty powerful. As I said, it used to be a lot more complex and it took me, I don't know, when I started investing, 10 years ago, maybe more, it seemed incredibly overwhelming to me. But now, luckily all these tech platforms and everything, they make things very simplified for us and pretty straightforward. So, if you have a need for it, it's very easy to do. So if there is one thing I want to leave you after you watch this video, is use Norbert Gambit if you want to buy more than $1,000 worth of US listed stocks or ETFs, and just buy it directly otherwise. And if you want to simplify all this, and there's a great Canadian listed alternative, such as VFV to the US listed VOO, just go for that. Most of the time, it's honestly gonna be worth it for that peace of mind. But again, let me know down in the comments below if you'd actually bother going through Norbert's Gambit, or if you'd rather just buy Canadian listed ETFs or pay the exchange fee. It would be very interesting to know because, as I said, unfortunately, I'm not overly exposed to the US stock exchange listed equities, so I'm curious where other people are at. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.